So here's something that I actually didn't give all that much time back when it first came out, because I had a couple of technical and control issues with it at the time. And I saw that it recently got a really very large update on that really nice new update thingamajigger that Steam has below all your suggestions. And I decided to just sort of take a look at it again, because I figured, it's been a while and a lot of updates since I actually last tried it, so why not see what's changed? And I'm really glad that I did, because I think this is a bit of one of those kind of indie sleeper Steam hits as far as it goes, where anyone that's tried it will probably say that they really liked it, but not enough people have tried it. This is 3030 Deathwar Redux, a space Odyssey, which first of all is a fantastic name, but is also pretty accurate, because it's definitely an Odyssey. It's a very large game. It might seem small and is very small in file size, but the universe that you have to play around in is definitely quite large. It's a very sandboxy type game that drops you in after a very quick tutorial on the controls and what else you can do, and then just says, okay, the universe is yours, have fun. And there is still a story to follow, a storyline that goes throughout the game with various characters. But a lot of the game's sort of playtime is based around all these missions that you can undertake and just exploring the various galaxies around the place, or I guess the galaxy, the various systems in it. And it is, as you could probably guess, one of those sorts of space games, almost like light space sims, in this case it's 2D, that is, I suppose, kind of following in the footsteps of what a lot of people liked about games like the X Series and even Elite, in that you can kind of make it into like a space trucker simulator, basically, which I know a lot of people really enjoy, that feeling of buying low, selling high, getting big cargo ships and the like, and trekking across space to find the best prices, mining stuff, making money that way, and all of that is in the game. You can do all of that, and it very much caters towards a lot of that kind of play style, because there are lots of cargo ships and tractor beams for upgraded mining and all sorts of things that really really kind of embody that play style. But there's also some pretty aggressive combat and some other stuff in there, and some other interesting things you can do, like this. This is a derelict. You can come across various derelicts in all sorts of the systems. A couple of them don't have any, but most of them have at least a few. And some have lots. And they're really large ships that are, well, not doing so good. And you can come across them and hop out of your ship and actually into a spacesuit and get in them and explore them. And you can find all sorts of things in here, from just, magazines, like rare issues of magazines that are worth $100 maybe, to large cargo containers, unclaimed, of all sorts of things. You could find like 30 tons of gold in one of these if you got really lucky, and transfer it all to your ship, and then go and make a bunch of money. I really appreciate this section of the game, because you can do it whenever you want, and as often as you want, effectively, and there's a lot to find in here, a lot of little in-jokes and other things like that. But also, just the atmosphere of it, it's really creepy. There's nothing really all that bad that happens in these sections, but they have a really good atmosphere. They're quite dark, literally, and the ambient noise, the sort of soundtrack that plays in the derelicts, is really unsettling, which makes them kind of fun to explore, because it's a very big break from the other parts of the game, which are not so creepy, although equally atmospheric, just in a different way. And the game consists mostly of taking on all of these various missions that you can find at the stations, and seeing if you can do them, if you feel that you actually are capable of doing whatever they ask, and some of them are timed, and then charting your way through space. Now, interestingly enough, space actually has a nebula, a bunch of nebulas surrounding the sort of outer areas that you really don't want to go into if you can help it. You can actually find little nebula charts in these derelicts, as well as chart them yourself by getting a nebula radar and then flying through them and seeing if you can find some gaps in what appears to just be a solid nebula. And this, for instance, is a very good example of why you don't want to get lost in them, because your ship hits this sort of red cloud and slows down, and you start to take shield damage and other sorts of bad things happen, and of course you use a lot more fuel because you're slowed. And that was a very thin part of the nebula right there that you can technically use as a sort of bridge if you have to, because you won't actually take any permanent damage because your shield will absorb it. It's very, very little in that case. But there are other parts of these nebulas that are very easy to get lost in and actually get destroyed if you're not careful, which adds a really cool element of exploration, basically seeing all these various systems and kind of getting tired of going the long way around. So you set off by yourself and try to find shortcuts. And if you actually do find these shortcuts, the game will chart them for you and actually help remind you that they're there on your map. Which is a cool feature because, that's one element of space exploration that I feel isn't as easy to do in 3D, and a lot of the really big 3D space sims having sort of nebulas that you can navigate. Usually they're just a very negative cloud that you want to stay away from. But making, in this case, almost like the real-life era of sail and canals and things like that is basically what we've got going on here, and it's pretty cool, actually, to be able to do things like that. The combat is, I suppose, fairly standard for a 2D space shooter. It reminds me a lot of Transcendence, which is a really, really fantastic game that I definitely need to do an episode on. And it plays a lot like Transcendence did, although mouse controlled in this case, if you want it to be. You don't actually have to use mouse controls if you don't want to. And every ship can be fitted with a main weapon, as well as a turret-mounted weapon if the ship has a turret on it. Although occupying both at the same time will actually have the damage of the weapons, because there were some balance issues which caused any ship with a turret to be automatically way better, because you could have two extremely powerful weapons on them with no downside. In this case, I usually just like to mount one weapon and avoid that and just mount it on the turret so I can have a 360-degree sort of fire instead of one mounted straight forward. But there are some that work really well mounted straight forward, usually the beam type weapons and things. So there's a lot to strategize and customize with your ship, and probably the other really big part of the game is the actual ship earning and ship collection itself, which is pretty cool because there are a huge amount of ships in this game. Like, seriously, there's a lot. There's dozens of them. And each of them have their own statistics and possible sort of uses, depending on what they're best at. And can also be upgraded via these sort of ship-wide upgrades in the shop, where once you purchase them, they're good for all future ships that you try out. And a very large chunk of the game is seeing a ship that you want, and then doing all the jobs and things that are required to actually get enough money to get it, and eventually buying it. This is where there is, I feel, one flaw in the game, although it's really just a design choice, so I wouldn't call it a flaw per se. It's just one thing that I would like to be different based on how I usually play these games, personally. Normally when you go and buy a ship, your current ship is actually used as almost like collateral, so you sell the ship that you're in, and based on about 90% of its value, roughly, you only have to pay the difference, basically, between the ship that you currently have and the ship that you want, which is really, really useful, and it kind of circumvents some of those really annoying systems in games like this, where you need to have an extra ship so that you can sell the one you're in if you wanted to get money towards the one you want to get, and things like that. It sort of cuts out the middleman and just automatically sells it for you and gives you the difference. But this does mean that you can't have multiple ships. You can only have one, because it automatically sells the one that you have. You can't choose not to do that, which isn't the biggest deal in the world, but considering how many, just the large amount of them in this game there actually is, it would be cool to occasionally be able to buy one outright instead of trading my current ship in for it, so I could have, say, a really fast, heavy freighter ship and a really agile, crazy, high missile capacity combat ship, for instance, and actually be able to switch between both of them at a station or something. But as it stands, you have to choose one, which is fine. The other kind of main part of the game is actually taking on these missions, and you can get things like an ability to haggle for the price, which is kind of fun, and the missions are quite varied, and there are an endless number of them. So every station you go to will have a very large selection of missions to choose from, and you can choose many at once, as long as you don't have multiple of the same types at once, like multiple missions where you have to photograph something. You can only have one of those at once, obviously, and multiple missions where you have to destroy junk, just orbiting, floating junk. You can only have one of those, I believe. Maybe you can. No, I think you can have two of those. Maybe it's the timed ones. I don't remember. Anyway, there are some exclusive missions that require you to only do one of them at a time. And every ship also has a cargo capacity as well as a cabin capacity, so you have to occasionally transport people instead of just things. And oftentimes you can basically be a taxi, effectively. You are a taxi that transports people throughout the system and sometimes throughout other systems, and if you can do it fast enough, you can get a lot of money by doing that. But you, of course, have to have at least the required number of cabins to transport everyone in the group. So, yeah, there are a lot of playstyles on offer here for your sort of 2D space shooter sandbox action, and it plays a lot like a game like Transcendence mixed with the X Series, a sort of, simpler 2D version of the X Series, which is really enjoyable. And it's not the kind of thing that you see all that often. You don't often see a 2D space exploration game that is this fully featured and interesting. Usually they focus on one specific thing, kind of like Space Pirates and Zombies does, and do that really well. Very rarely do they actually emulate the entire sort of big sandbox open galaxy experience, which is what we have here. So it's cool to see. It's also incredibly, as I mentioned earlier, atmospheric, because it has this sort of retro future vibe to it. The music is really, really good. The soundtrack is fantastic. Only some of the music is playing in the background because there is a YouTube safe mode to prevent you from getting some of the copyrighted music playing during the time that you want to record, which is handy. Thank you, devs. And the music is great, and the sort of ambience in the stations is the sort of space bars and things like that with various decorations and people chatting. You can talk to them and scan their identities and all sorts of stuff like that. It has a lot of character and a lot of atmosphere to it. Definitely a sort of retro future vibe, really combined with the sort of jazzy, sometimes almost like ska sounding music, and the retro future sort of junk space vibe. It gives me like a Cowboy Bebop feel a little bit, which is to be commended, I think, because anything that can do that, I'm definitely going to be into. So that is basically the, for the most part at least, a good explanation, I hope, of 3030 Deathwar Redux, because it can do a lot if you are into the, you know, space trucker, space combat style games, only this time in 2D. And I am, for sure. I think this is a really good thing for people that love any of those things, or if you just want to sit around there and crush all the bugs on all the terminals across the universe, you can do that too if you want to. Again, just a little example of the sort of character and the atmosphere that the game gives off. It's adorable, I guess, in that way that you can find like space discs, like floppy disks in space and things like that, because it's retro future style. It's all very much drenched in that kind of atmosphere, and I definitely appreciate that. So the game is available right now on Steam for $15 if you want to give it a shot, and it has been very heavily updated recently, and it added a bunch of new ships and weapons. The latest update did, like a lot of them, and that adds for a lot of extra variety and things to earn towards, which is always good in a game like this. Also, it has Steam Workshop support, so you can mod in anything from new weapons to new ships and other just physical or aesthetic alterations. And I think I've seen one mod that adds what appears to be a homing chicken. So, I mean, I have to recommend that. But yeah, that's the game. Pick it up in the description below if you want to check it out. And I'd recommend it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.